Hey everyone, this is Lily, and I'm so incredibly grateful you're here with me today. Whether you're listening on your drive to work, at the gym, or during your lunch break, I want you to know that this moment right now is exactly what you needed. Welcome back to the Power Podcast, where we dive deep into the real conversations that actually change your life. Before we jump into today's incredible episode, I want to remind you to do 3 things for me real quick. First, smash that like button if you appreciate this content. Second, subscribe to our channel because we're dropping powerful episodes every single week, and you don't want to miss one. And third, make sure you check out our podcast playlist, where we have an entire collection of episodes designed to transform your mindset and your life. That podcast playlist is absolutely golden, and if you want to binge some seriously transformative content, it's all right there waiting for you. It's curated specifically for your growth journey. Okay, enough housekeeping. Let's get into what I know is going to change everything for you today. You know what I realized recently? It's something that completely shifted the way I see my entire existence, and I genuinely believe that once you understand what I'm about to share, your world is going to look completely different too. Are you ready for this? Here's the thing. Most people spend their entire lives looking for that one magical thing that's going to change everything. They think it's going to be luck. They think it's going to be getting the right connections. They think it's going to be some extraordinary circumstance that just falls into their lap. But here's what I'm about to tell you, and I want you to really sit with this. The single most powerful force that determines whether you succeed or fail, whether you rise or you stay stuck, whether your life becomes everything you've dreamed or something you constantly regret. That force is not external. It's not outside of you. It's not something you need to find somewhere else. That force is your internal framework. That force is how you see yourself. That force is what I'm calling your core perspective. And when I say core perspective, I mean the internal narrative that plays in your mind every single day. I mean the way you talk to yourself when nobody's listening. I mean the story you tell yourself about who you are and what you're capable of achieving. This is absolutely everything. Let me paint you a picture. I want you to imagine 2 people, and they're actually really similar on the surface. They have pretty similar backgrounds. They grew up in comparable circumstances. They had similar education. They face the exact same challenge, the exact same obstacle on the exact same day. Person A looks at that challenge, and their immediate thought is, I'm not equipped for this. This is too much. I don't have what it takes. Why does this always happen to me? They feel heavy. They feel defeated before they even try. Their energy drops. And you know what happens? They don't try. They give up. They walk away convinced that they can't do it. Person B looks at that exact same challenge, and their immediate thought is completely different. They think, okay, this is difficult, but so what? Difficult things are just opportunities to become stronger. I've overcome things before. I'm going to figure this out. This challenge is actually showing me something I need to learn. Their energy rises, their focus sharpens. They get creative, they take action. Same challenge, 2 completely different outcomes. What's the difference? It's not intelligence, it's not talent, it's not luck, it's their perspective. It's how they frame what's happening to them. It's the story they're telling themselves about what that obstacle means. And here's what absolutely blows my mind when I think about this. Most people never, ever realize that they have complete control over that story. They walk around thinking their circumstances are deciding their future, when actually their interpretation of their circumstances is deciding their future. Your perspective is your power. So let's talk about what I mean by your internal narrative, because this is really the foundation of everything we're going to discuss today. Your internal narrative is basically the constant conversation that's happening in your head. It's the voice that comments on everything. It's the interpreter that decides what things mean. When you wake up and you see a rainy day, your narrative either says, oh no, this is going to ruin my day. Or it says, great, I get to stay cozy and focus on my projects. Same weather, different narratives, different emotional experience, different actions taken. When you make a mistake at work, your narrative either says, I'm incompetent, I always mess things up, I'm never going to succeed. Or it says, okay, that didn't work the way I planned. What can I learn from this? How can I do it better next time? Same mistake, different narratives, different recovery speed, different outcomes. Now, here's the really important part. Most people think their narratives just happen to them. They think they're stuck with whatever story their mind automatically generates. But that's not true at all. You have way more control than you realize. You can intentionally choose what your narrative says. This is where people get confused, though. I'm not talking about toxic positivity. I'm not saying you should lie to yourself and pretend everything's perfect when it's not. That doesn't work. Your brain knows when you're lying to yourself, and it will reject the message. What I'm talking about is realistic, empowering interpretation. You acknowledge what's actually happening. Yes, this is hard. Yes, this is challenging. Yes, I'm scared. But then you add, and I'm capable, and I've overcome difficult things before, and I'm going to learn from this, and my future is not determined by this moment. That's the kind of narrative that actually works because it's truthful, but it's also empowering. I want to dive deeper into how this actually works in your life because this is where it gets really interesting. Your perspective doesn't just make you feel better or worse. Your perspective literally creates different realities because it creates different actions, and different actions create different results. Let me explain this through what I call the perspective action result cycle. It starts with your perspective, with how you see something. That perspective creates an emotion. That emotion drives an action or a series of actions. Those actions create results. Those results seem to confirm your original perspective, which makes your perspective stronger and more automatic. Here's a concrete example. Let's say you're trying to build a business or create something from scratch. Your perspective is, I don't know how to do this. I'm not a natural entrepreneur. I probably don't have what it takes. That perspective creates doubt, which creates hesitation, which creates inaction. You don't reach out to potential clients. You don't show up consistently. You don't invest in learning the skills you need. 6 months go by, and guess what? Your business hasn't grown. You have no customers. Nothing has changed. And your brain goes, see, I was right. I don't have what it takes. This confirms everything I believed about myself. Your original perspective just got stronger. But what if your perspective was different from day one? What if you looked at that same challenge and thought, I don't know how to do this yet, but I'm capable of learning? Millions of people have built successful businesses, and so can I. I'm going to seek out information. I'm going to take consistent action. I'm going to adjust based on feedback. That different perspective creates confidence, which creates consistent action, which creates learning, which creates some results. Maybe small at first, but they're real. And now your brain has evidence that your new perspective is correct. Same situation, different perspective, completely different trajectory. This is how powerful your internal framework is. I want to make this really practical for you because I know some of you are thinking, okay, Lily, this sounds good in theory, but what does this actually look like in my everyday life? So let me break down some specific areas where your perspective makes a massive difference. First, let's talk about relationships. Your perspective about yourself determines the quality of relationships you attract and create. If your perspective is that you're not worthy of kindness, you attract people who treat you poorly, and you accept it because it matches your internal belief. But if your perspective is that you deserve respect and genuine connection, you attract different people. You set better boundaries. You invest in healthier relationships. Second, health and fitness. Your perspective determines your consistency and results. If your perspective is that you're just naturally someone who's out of shape and can't change, guess what? You don't sustain your fitness efforts. You quit the gym. You go back to old habits. But if your perspective is that you're someone who's committed to building a healthy body and mind, that perspective drives you to show up even when it's hard. Third, learning and skill development. Your perspective about your own capability determines what you pursue and how persistent you are. If you believe you're not smart enough to learn something new, you won't try or you'll give up easily. But if you believe intelligence is something you can develop, you'll invest the time and effort to learn. Fourth, handling adversity. When something goes wrong, your perspective determines whether you become bitter or better. Do you see it as evidence that life is against you, or do you see it as information showing you how to adjust? That one shift in perspective changes your entire trajectory through difficult times. Fifth, opportunity recognition. Your perspective literally determines what you notice. If you think good things don't happen to people like you, your brain literally filters out opportunities that actually are available. But if you believe good things are possible, you notice them, you see them, you act on them. This is absolutely profound when you really think about it. All right, I want to go even deeper because this concept just gets more and more valuable the more you understand it. Let me talk about your perspective as your actual superpower, because that's what it is. Think about superheroes for a second. What makes them different? It's not just their abilities, it's how they see themselves and their place in the world. Superman has his powers, but what really makes him who he is his perspective that he should use those powers to help people. That perspective directs everything he does. Your perspective works the same way. It's not just how you see things, it's the actual directing force of your entire life. It's what determines where your energy goes, what you prioritize, what you pursue, what you let go of. So here's what I want you to understand about your perspective as a superpower. First, it's always active. It's working right now, this second. Your perspective is constantly creating your reality. You can't turn it off. The only question is whether you're going to direct it consciously or let it run on autopilot. Second, it's trainable. You're not stuck with the perspective you have right now. You can literally rewire your internal framework through deliberate practice. Every time you choose a more empowering interpretation, you're strengthening that neural pathway. You're training your brain to see differently. Third, it's contagious. Your perspective influences the people around you. If you walk into a room with a perspective of possibility and confidence, people feel that. They respond to that. Conversely, if you walk in with a perspective of defeat and limitation, people pick up on that too. Your perspective literally affects the energy of your entire environment. Fourth, it's the difference between success and failure in almost every domain. I'm not exaggerating. Look at any successful person, and you'll find a particular perspective that got them there. Look at anyone struggling, and you'll find a perspective that's holding them back. This is why I'm so passionate about helping you understand this, because once you get this, once you really internalize that your perspective is your superpower, everything changes. Now, I want to help you become really aware of what your current perspective actually is, because you can't change something you're not aware of. So let's do a little inventory together right now. Your perspective reveals itself through your language. Pay attention to the words you use about yourself and your life. Do you say things like, "I always mess things up," or "I'm terrible at this," or "I never get lucky"? Those are perspective indicators. They're showing you what your internal framework is saying. Your perspective reveals itself through your default reactions. When something unexpected happens, what's your first internal response? Is it fear? Is it curiosity? Is it resignation? That automatic response is showing you your perspective. Your perspective reveals itself through what you focus on. When you're scrolling through social media, do you focus on what's wrong with your life compared to others? Or do you look for inspiration and things you can learn? What you naturally focus on reveals your framework. Your perspective reveals itself through your effort level. How much effort are you willing to put into things? Do you give up easily? Or do you persist through difficulty? Do you ask for help? Or do you isolate? Your effort patterns show your perspective about what's possible. Your perspective reveals itself through your relationships. What kind of people do you attract? How do you treat people? How do you expect to be treated? Your relationship patterns mirror your internal perspective about your worth. Your perspective reveals itself through your choices. What are you choosing to do with your time? What are you investing in? What are you avoiding? Your choices are perfect indicators of what you really believe is possible and what you really believe you deserve. Take a moment right now and honestly assess. What is your current perspective? Not the perspective you wish you had, not the perspective you think you should have, but the perspective you actually have right now. The one that's driving your actual behavior? Get really honest with yourself about this. Okay, so you've identified your current perspective, and maybe it's not where you want it to be. That's totally fine. In fact, recognizing that is the first step to changing it. Now, let's talk about how to actually shift your perspective, because this is the practical stuff that's going to transform your life. First strategy, deliberate reframing. This is where you take a situation and you consciously choose a different interpretation. Let me give you some examples. You don't get the job you interviewed for. Default perspective. I'm not good enough. I'll never get this job. This is evidence that I'm failing. New perspective. This wasn't the right fit, and that's actually okay. This means the right opportunity is still coming. I learned something from this interview that I can use next time. Same event, completely different interpretation. The first one leads to giving up. The second one leads to resilience. You see how powerful this is? Second strategy, consuming new information and perspectives. You become like the people you spend time with and the ideas you consume. If you're only consuming content that reinforces limiting beliefs, your perspective won't change. But if you seek out books, podcasts, and content from people who have empowering perspectives, your brain starts to absorb those perspectives too. You literally reshape your thinking through what you consume. Third strategy, seeking evidence for a new perspective. This is really powerful. Once you've identified a new perspective you want to have, actively look for evidence that supports it. If you want to have the perspective that, I'm capable of learning new things, start noticing every time you learn something. Start noticing every problem you solve. Your brain will start collecting evidence for this new perspective. Fourth strategy, taking action from the new perspective. This is crucial. You don't get a new perspective and then wait for circumstances to change. You take action as if the new perspective is already true. If your new perspective is that you're someone who's disciplined, you take actions that a disciplined person would take. You show up even when you don't feel like it. You follow through on commitments. Your actions reinforce your new perspective. Fifth strategy, self-talk and affirmations. Okay, I know affirmations get a bad rap, and I understand why. A lot of people use them in a way that's just disconnected from reality, and their brain rejects them. But when you use affirmations strategically, they work. The key is making them believable and specific. Instead of saying, I'm rich, say, I'm making progress toward financial independence, and I'm getting smarter about money every single day. That's believable. That resonates. Your brain accepts it. Sixth strategy, surrounding yourself with people who embody the perspective you want. This might mean spending less time with people who constantly reinforce limiting beliefs and more time with people who embody the perspective you're trying to develop. The people around you shape your thinking, whether you realize it or not. Seventh strategy, celebrating small evidence of your new perspective. Every time you see evidence that your new perspective is showing up in your life, acknowledge it, celebrate it, notice it. This positive reinforcement makes the new perspective stronger. I want to be really honest with you because I think it's important. Shifting your perspective is not always easy, and I don't want you to think that just by listening to this podcast, everything's automatically going to change. Your brain has been building your current perspective for years, maybe decades. Your brain has tons of evidence supporting your current way of seeing things. When you try to shift your perspective, you're basically going against all that established neural pathways. Your brain is going to resist. It's going to feel weird. It's going to feel fake. The old perspective is going to keep trying to pull you back because it's familiar, and familiar feels safe to your brain. This is where persistence comes in. This is where you have to decide that you're going to commit to this shift even when it feels uncomfortable. You're going to keep choosing the new perspective even when your automatic thoughts pull you back to the old one. Over time, over weeks and months of consistent practice, the new perspective becomes your default. But here's what's important to know. You're not going to wake up one day and feel completely different. It's more gradual than that. It's more subtle. You'll notice that you're handling situations a little differently. You're not getting as upset about things. You're bouncing back faster from disappointments. You're taking more risks because you believe in yourself a little more. And here's the beautiful thing about doing this work. As your perspective shifts and you start getting different results, that becomes evidence that actually supports your new perspective. Your brain starts to collect evidence for your new way of seeing things, and that's when momentum builds. That's when everything starts to accelerate. I want to talk specifically about how your perspective relates to fear, because fear is probably the #1 thing that keeps people from changing their perspective. Fear is what keeps people stuck in their old way of seeing things. Fear says, what if you're wrong? Fear says, what if you try this new perspective and it doesn't work? Fear says, what if you fail? And because fear feels very real, because it's a powerful emotion, a lot of people just give into it and stay with their old perspective. But here's what I've realized about fear. Fear is often just based on your current perspective. Let me explain. If your perspective is that you're not capable of handling difficult things, then trying something new feels terrifying. Because from your perspective, if it goes wrong, you won't be able to handle it. But if your perspective shifts to include the belief that you're resilient and capable, then that same situation feels manageable because you believe you can handle whatever comes. Same situation, different perspective, completely different relationship to fear. This is why shifting your perspective is so powerful for moving through fear. The fear often dissolves when your perspective changes. But I also want to be real about this. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is moving forward despite fear. So even with a shifted perspective, you might still feel afraid, but you'll be more willing to move forward anyway because you believe in yourself. You believe it's possible. You believe you can handle it. I want to talk about how your perspective affects your relationships because this is such an important area, and I think most people don't realize how deeply their perspective shapes their relationships. Your perspective about yourself determines the standards you set in relationships. If your internal perspective is that you're not worthy of respect, you're going to tolerate disrespect from others. You're going to accept treatment that you shouldn't accept. You're going to chase people who don't value you because that matches your internal belief about what you deserve. But if your perspective about yourself is that you're worthy of kindness and respect, your entire relationship dynamic changes. You attract people who treat you well because that's what you expect. You set boundaries because you know what you deserve. You invest in relationships that are reciprocal and healthy. Your perspective about others also shapes your relationships dramatically. If your perspective is that people are generally selfish and out to get you, you're going to be defensive in your relationships. You're going to hold back. You're going to assume the worst in people. You're going to create distance. But if your perspective is that people are generally good and doing the best they can with what they have, you're more open, you're more generous, you're more willing to give people the benefit of the doubt. You create connection instead of distance. Here's the thing. Both perspectives seem to be confirmed by reality because your perspective determines what you notice and what you interpret. If you believe people are selfish, you'll notice the selfish things they do. But if you believe people are generally good, you'll notice the kind things they do. Same people, different perspectives, completely different relational experiences. Your career trajectory is so deeply connected to your perspective, and I think this is an area where shifting your perspective can create absolutely massive results. Your perspective about your own skills and capabilities determines how much you're willing to stretch. If your perspective is that you're not qualified for that promotion or that new role, you're not going to apply. You're not going to put yourself out there. But if your perspective is that you're capable and that you can learn whatever you need to learn, you're going to take chances. Your perspective about failure determines how much you're willing to try new things. If you see failure as evidence that you can't do something, you're not going to experiment much. You're going to stay in your comfort zone. But if you see failure as information, as feedback that helps you adjust, you're going to be much more willing to innovate and take risks. Your perspective about what's possible for your career determines how much energy you put into your work. If you believe that good careers only happen to people with certain advantages, people who are naturally lucky, you're not going to put much energy into building something great. You might just go through the motions. But if your perspective is that you can create something meaningful, that you can build a career you're proud of, that your effort actually matters, you're going to show up differently. You're going to invest more. You're going to be strategic. You're going to be intentional about your growth. What's fascinating is that these different perspectives actually create different external realities. The person with the empowering perspective takes more chances, learns more, networks more, puts in more effort. And guess what? They actually get better results. Their perspective literally created their reality. Okay, I want to talk about something that a lot of people don't talk about, and that's how your perspective directly affects your financial results. Your mindset about money is absolutely huge. Your perspective about your own earning potential determines how much money you're willing to ask for. If your perspective is that you're not valuable, you're not going to negotiate your salary. You're going to undercharge for your work. You're going to leave money on the table because on some level, you don't believe you deserve it. But if your perspective is that you're valuable, that your work matters, that people should pay you fairly for your value, you're going to have completely different financial conversations. You're going to negotiate. You're going to charge what you're worth. You're going to stop undervaluing yourself. Your perspective about abundance versus scarcity also shapes your financial reality. If you believe there's only a limited amount of money available, and if others get it, you can't have it, you operate from fear. You hoard. You don't invest. You don't take calculated risks. You stay small. But if you believe there's enough money available for everyone, if you believe your effort can create value that people will pay for, you operate from a totally different place. You invest in your education. You take strategic risks. You build things. You create value. And ironically, that perspective is what actually creates financial success. Your perspective about your own responsibility for your finances also matters enormously. If your perspective is that your financial situation is just how things are, that you can't do anything about it, that it's just luck or circumstances, you're not going to take action to improve it. But if your perspective is that you have power over your financial situation, that your choices matter, that you can learn and improve, you're going to make different financial decisions. Again, here's the beautiful part. The perspective that leads to taking action is the perspective that actually creates better financial results. So, your perspective literally becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So, I've talked a lot about the power of perspective and how to shift it, but I want to give you some really practical daily practices that you can implement right now. Because knowledge without action is just information, right? It doesn't actually change anything. So let's talk about the practices that are going to make this real for you. First, daily practice. Morning perspective setting. Before your day gets crazy, before you check your phone, before you get pulled into the chaos, take 5 minutes to set your perspective for the day. Ask yourself, what perspective do I want to have today? Maybe it's, I'm capable of handling whatever comes. Maybe it's, I'm going to look for opportunities to learn. Maybe it's, I'm going to be kind to myself today. Set that perspective deliberately. Second daily practice, moment-to-moment perspective checks. Throughout your day, when something frustrating happens or something doesn't go the way you planned, pause, take a breath, ask yourself, what perspective am I currently holding about this? Is it serving me? Is there a different way to see this? This creates real-time awareness, and awareness is the first step to change. Third daily practice, gratitude and perspective. Every day, write down or mentally note 3 things you're grateful for. Gratitude is one of the fastest ways to shift your perspective because it literally changes what you're paying attention to. Instead of focusing on what's wrong or what's missing, you're focusing on what's good and what you have. Fourth daily practice, reviewing evidence for your new perspective. If you're working on shifting to a new perspective, keep a little note throughout the day of evidence that supports this new perspective. If you're working on believing you're capable, notice every time you do something well, or solve a problem, or learn something new. This trains your brain to collect evidence for your new perspective. Fifth daily practice, input management. Be really intentional about what information you're consuming throughout the day. Are you listening to things that empower you or things that discourage you? Are you spending time with people who inspire you or people who drain you? Are you reading things that expand your thinking or things that reinforce limitation? Your inputs shape your perspective, so manage them consciously. Sixth daily practice, evening reflection. Before bed, take a few minutes to reflect on your day. What went well? What did you learn? Where did you show up from your best perspective? Where did you slip back into old patterns? Don't judge yourself, just observe. This helps you understand your perspective patterns and consciously choose differently tomorrow. As you start implementing these practices and working on shifting your perspective, you're probably going to encounter some blocks. Let me talk about the most common ones because I want you to be prepared and not get discouraged when you hit them. First block, the belief that your current perspective is reality. This is huge. A lot of people think their perspective is just how things are. They think it's objective reality, not a subjective interpretation. This is why they don't bother trying to change it. But here's the truth. Your perspective is a story you've been telling yourself. It's not objective reality. It's your interpretation of reality. And interpretations can be changed. Second block, lack of evidence for the new perspective. Your brain wants evidence. It wants proof. When you start adopting a new perspective, it feels weird because you don't have years of evidence supporting it yet. Your brain basically says, I don't have proof that this new perspective is true, so I'm going to stick with the old one. This is why the practice of actively looking for evidence for your new perspective is so important. Third block, social pressure to stay the same. The people around you are used to you being a certain way. If you start changing your perspective and your behavior, it might make them uncomfortable. They might question you. They might try to pull you back into your old patterns. This is real, and it's hard, which is why surrounding yourself with people who support your growth is so important. Fourth block, identity attachment. This is a big one. We get attached to our stories about ourselves. We say things like, I'm just not good at this, or I'm not a risk taker, or I'm too anxious. And then that becomes our identity. We defend it, we protect it, we don't question it. But you have to be willing to release that old identity to step into a new one. Fifth block, impatience. Change doesn't happen overnight. You shift your perspective and you want everything to change immediately. But it takes time for new neural pathways to develop. It takes time for your brain to collect evidence for your new perspective. If you give up too soon, you never get to see the results. Sixth block, conflicting perspectives. A lot of people have conflicting perspectives running at the same time. Part of them believes they're capable, but another part believes they're not. Part of them believes their dreams are possible, but another part thinks they're being naive. This internal conflict creates paralysis. Part of the work is bringing these conflicting perspectives into alignment. I want to touch on something really important, and that's how your perspective affects your relationship with yourself, particularly your self-compassion. Because I think a lot of people are walking around being incredibly hard on themselves, and that's a perspective issue. Your perspective about yourself determines how harshly you judge yourself when you make mistakes or when things don't go the way you wanted. If your perspective is that you should be perfect, that mistakes are evidence of failure, then you're going to be really hard on yourself. You're going to experience shame. You're going to beat yourself up. That's exhausting, and it's also counterproductive. But if your perspective includes self-compassion, If you see mistakes as a normal part of learning and growth, if you treat yourself the way you would treat a good friend who made a mistake, everything changes. You recover faster from setbacks. You're more willing to take risks because the consequence of failure feels less catastrophic. You have more energy and resilience. Self-compassion is not self-pity. It's not making excuses for yourself. It's acknowledging that you're human, that you're doing your best, and that struggling sometimes is part of the human experience. It's being kind to yourself while still holding yourself accountable and committed to growth. Here's what I've noticed. People who have high self-compassion actually end up being more successful than people who are incredibly hard on themselves. Why? Because they're more resilient. They're more willing to fail because they know they can handle it. They bounce back faster. They don't get stuck in shame spirals that prevent action. So, as you're working on shifting your perspective, make sure you're also shifting toward a perspective that includes compassion for yourself. You deserve that. I want to dive into something that's really fascinating, and that's how your perspective creates narratives that you tell about yourself and your life. Because we're all storytellers. We all create narratives, and those narratives become our reality. Think about the stories you tell about yourself. Do you have a story about how you're bad with money? Do you have a story about how you're not creative? Do you have a story about how relationships never work out for you? Do you have a story about how you're naturally unlucky? Where did these stories come from? Most of the time, they came from one or two experiences that got generalized into a permanent story about who you are. Maybe you failed at something once, and then you created a story that you're a failure. Maybe you experienced rejection once, and then you created a story that you're unlovable. Maybe something bad happened once, and then you created a story that you have bad luck. Here's what's powerful. You can question those stories. You can ask yourself, is this story actually true? Or is it just an interpretation I created based on limited evidence? You can look for evidence against the story. You can consciously create a new story that's based on a broader perspective. Let me give you an example. Old story. I'm just not a naturally disciplined person. New story. I'm developing discipline through consistent practice, and I'm getting stronger every day. It's not ignoring the times you haven't been disciplined, it's just putting that in a broader context where you're actively developing that quality. The beautiful thing about consciously choosing your stories is that your brain will then start collecting evidence to support your new story. You'll start noticing the times you are disciplined. You'll start recognizing your progress. Your new story becomes self-reinforcing. I want to talk about something that's really important and often overlooked, and that's how the collective perspective of your environment affects you. Because you don't live in a vacuum, you live in a culture, a community, a family system, and all of those have collective perspectives that influence you. If you grew up in an environment where people believed that hard work is what matters, you probably internalized that perspective. If you grew up in an environment where people believed that you can't trust others, you probably internalized that too. If you grew up in an environment where financial success was highly valued, that shaped your perspective. If you grew up in an environment where creativity was seen as frivolous, that shaped your perspective differently. The thing is, sometimes these collective perspectives are empowering, and sometimes they're limiting, and a lot of people never question them because they seem like just the way things are. Not like chosen perspectives. But here's what's important to know. Just because that's how your family sees things, just because that's the cultural narrative in your community, doesn't mean you have to accept those perspectives as your own. You can choose. You can examine the perspectives you've inherited and decide which ones you want to keep and which ones you want to release. This is especially important if you're trying to create a life that's different from what your environment taught you was possible. Because your environment is not going to naturally support perspectives that contradict its collective narrative. You're going to have to consciously build support for your new perspective. One of the most powerful perspective shifts you can make is moving from a victim perspective to a creator perspective. And I want to be really clear about what I mean because this is often misunderstood. When I talk about victim perspective, I don't mean you're weak or pathetic. I mean, you see yourself as essentially powerless in your own life. You see your circumstances as something that happened to you, not something you have agency over. Bad things happen, and you're just reacting to them. You're responding to life, not creating it. Creator perspective is when you see yourself as having real agency in your life. You see challenges as something you can respond to creatively. You see obstacles as problems to solve, not stop signs. You see yourself as someone who can influence your outcomes through your choices and your effort. Now, here's what's important. This doesn't mean everything that's happened to you is your fault. Life is sometimes unfair. Bad things happen to good people. Circumstances matter. But what happens between here and your future? That's where your creator perspective comes in. That's where your choices matter. Let me give you a concrete example. Someone experiences discrimination. That's real, and it's not their fault. Victim perspective says, the world is against me and there's nothing I can do about it. Creator perspective says, that discrimination exists and I'm going to figure out how to succeed anyway. I'm going to create my own opportunities. I'm going to build something they can't stop. See the difference? Creator perspective doesn't deny the reality of the obstacle. It just refuses to be stopped by it. It looks for the ways it can move forward regardless. This shift from victim to creator is absolutely transformative. Because when you see yourself as a creator, you start taking action. You start solving problems. You start building. You start moving toward what you want instead of just reacting to what's happening. I want to talk specifically about how your perspective matters in difficult times, because this is when it really, really counts. When everything is going smoothly, it's easy to have a positive perspective, but when things fall apart, that's when your perspective determines whether you survive and grow or whether you break. I want to share something real with you. Life is hard sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes. People you love leave, health challenges appear, financial problems come up, dreams don't work out the way you hoped. These things happen to everyone. In those moments, your perspective becomes everything. Your perspective determines whether you can see past the current difficulty to a future where things are different. Your perspective determines whether you can maintain hope while simultaneously being realistic about the challenge. I've seen people go through incredibly difficult situations and come out the other side stronger, wiser, more compassionate. And I've seen people go through similar difficulties and come out bitter, defeated, closed off. The difference is almost always perspective. It's not toxic positivity. It's not pretending everything is fine when it's not. It's the perspective that says, this is incredibly hard, and I'm scared, and I'm going to move through this anyway. This experience is going to teach me something. I'm going to grow from this. That perspective is what allows you to take the steps you need to take, even when you're afraid. That perspective is what allows you to reach out for help instead of isolating. That perspective is what allows you to keep going when it would be easier to give up. I want to make something really clear. Working on your perspective is not a one-time thing. It's not like you shift your perspective and then you're done and you never have to think about it again. It's an ongoing practice. This is actually beautiful when you think about it. It means you never stop growing. It means there's always more to discover about how you're seeing things. It means every day you have an opportunity to choose a more empowering perspective. Your perspective is like a muscle. The more you practice choosing empowering perspectives, the stronger that muscle gets. The more automatic it becomes. Eventually, what started as a conscious choice becomes your default way of seeing things. But that does require ongoing practice. It requires staying aware. It requires continuing to question your automatic thoughts and interpretations. It requires continuing to consume information and spend time with people who support your growth perspective. This is why I'm so passionate about creating content like this and building a community around these ideas, because this work is not something you do alone. It's supported by community. It's supported by ongoing learning and reminding yourself of these principles. Something that a lot of people don't realize is that your perspective actually affects your physical health. Your mind and body are connected, and your perspective influences your body's physiological state. For example, if your perspective is one of constant stress and threat, your nervous system is going to be in a more activated state. Your cortisol levels are going to be higher. Your immune system is going to be more suppressed. You're going to experience more inflammation, more illness, more pain. But if your perspective includes a sense of safety and capability, even in the face of challenges, your nervous system is going to be in a more regulated state. Your cortisol levels are going to be more balanced. Your immune system is going to be more active. You're going to experience better overall health. This isn't just about feeling good emotionally. This is about actual physical health markers. The perspective you hold is literally affecting whether your body is healing or whether it's breaking down. This is why practices like meditation, which help shift your perspective toward present moment awareness and safety, are so powerful for health. This is why gratitude practices, which shift your perspective toward what's good in your life, are so powerful for health. This is why working with a therapist to shift limiting perspectives can actually improve your physical symptoms. Your perspective literally affects whether you get sick and how quickly you recover from illness. So if you're interested in your physical health, working on your perspective is absolutely a worthwhile investment. I want to talk about how your perspective affects your creativity because this is an area where I think the impact is huge, but often unrecognized. If your perspective is that you're not a creative person, if you don't see yourself as having original ideas or artistic capability, then you're probably not going to explore that part of yourself. You're not going to make time for creative pursuits. You're not going to take risks with creative expression. You're going to leave that part of you undeveloped. But what if you shifted your perspective? What if you saw creativity not as something you're born with or without, but as something you can develop? What if you believed that creativity is about making new combinations of existing things, and anyone can do that? A different perspective would lead to different actions. You'd spend time on creative pursuits. You'd experiment. You'd play around. You'd share your work, even if it's imperfect. And here's the thing. The more you engage with your creativity, the better you get at it. Your perspective literally becomes self-fulfilling. This applies to every type of creativity, whether we're talking about artistic creativity, entrepreneurial creativity, problem-solving creativity, or interpersonal creativity. Your perspective about your creative capacity determines how much of that capacity you actually express. One of the most powerful uses of perspective is meaning-making. Humans have a deep need to make sense of their experiences, to find meaning in what happens to us. And your perspective determines what meaning you assign to events. This is huge because the meaning you assign determines how that event affects you going forward. If something difficult happens and you assign the meaning, "This is happening to ruin me," it affects you differently than if you assign the meaning, "This is happening to teach me something." Viktor Frankl, who was a Holocaust survivor, talked about this extensively. He said, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. That space is where your perspective lives. That space is where you decide what meaning to assign." He found that the people who survived the concentration camps with their humanity intact were not the ones who avoided suffering. They were the ones who found meaning in their suffering. They saw it as an opportunity to demonstrate their character. They saw it as part of a larger story that mattered. We don't live in concentration camps, thank goodness. But we all face difficulty. We all face pain. We all face disappointment. And how we assign meaning to those experiences determines whether they break us or build us. A powerful perspective is one that actively searches for meaning and growth in difficulty. Your perspective about time is also really important, and I want to explore this with you. Different perspectives on time create different ways of living. There's a scarcity perspective on time. This perspective says, "I don't have enough time. Everyone else has more time than me. Time is slipping away from me." This perspective creates anxiety, rushing, burnout, and a constant sense of not doing enough. But there's also an abundance perspective on time. This perspective says, "I have enough time for what matters to me. I choose how to use my time. I can create the life I want through how I allocate my time." This perspective creates calm, intentionality, and a sense of agency. Or there's a present moment perspective on time. This perspective says, "The only time that matters is right now. The future is created by how I show up right now." This perspective creates peace and presence. The perspective you hold about time literally determines how you move through your life. If you think you don't have enough time, you're going to feel rushed. If you think you have enough time, you're going to feel calm, Same amount of time, different perspectives, completely different experience. I want to touch on something that affects everyone eventually, and that's how your perspective about aging shapes your experience of growing older. There's a perspective that sees aging as decline. This perspective says, I'm getting older, I'm losing my abilities, the best years are behind me, everything gets worse from here. This perspective can lead to depression, withdrawal, and a kind of surrendering to decline. But there's also a perspective that sees aging as growth. This perspective says, I'm getting older and wiser. I have more experience. I know myself better. I'm finally becoming who I was meant to be. This perspective can lead to continued growth, deeper wisdom, and a sense of purpose. Research actually shows that people who have a positive perspective about aging live longer and healthier lives. Their perspective literally affects their physical health outcomes. This is how powerful your perspective about aging is. As you move through different life stages, the perspective you hold about that stage matters a lot. Are you seeing each phase as a loss of youth or as an arrival at something better? Are you grieving what's gone or celebrating what's here? Here's something really important. Your perspective determines how you define success, and this is crucial because the definition of success you're holding determines what you pursue. A lot of people have inherited definitions of success from their family or their culture. Success means money. Success means status. Success means having a prestigious job or being married by a certain age or having certain accomplishments. If that's your definition, you're pursuing that, and maybe when you get it, you feel empty, because maybe that's not what actually matters to you. But what if you shifted your perspective about success? What if success meant having deep relationships? What if success meant doing work that matters to you? What if success meant having time freedom? What if success meant contributing to your community? Different perspective, different definition, different life. The work is not just pursuing success, it's first figuring out from a clear perspective what success actually means to you. And here's what's interesting. When you define success according to your own values and perspective, rather than inherited definitions, you're more likely to actually achieve it because you're genuinely motivated. You're not chasing someone else's dream. I want to talk about something that might seem distant, but is actually really important right now. Your perspective affects the legacy you leave. And I think about legacy a lot more than I used to. Legacy is not just about money or achievements, it's about the impact you have on people. It's about the example you set. It's about what people remember about you and how you made them feel. If your perspective is that it's every person for themselves, that you're competing with everyone around you, then the legacy you leave will reflect that. People will remember you as someone who was out for themselves. But if your perspective is that we're all connected, that helping others is important, that your job is to make other people's lives better, then that's going to be your legacy. People are going to remember you as someone who cared. The perspective you hold right now, the way you treat people, the way you show up, is creating your legacy. Not someday, right now, every single day. As we come toward the end of this conversation, I want to talk about integrating your new perspective. Because understanding something intellectually and actually living it are two different things. Integration means that your new perspective becomes your actual default way of seeing things. It means you don't have to constantly remind yourself of your new perspective. It just becomes how you are. And that takes time and practice. Here's how you integrate a new perspective. First, you practice it deliberately. You consciously choose it in situations where your old perspective would normally kick in. Second, you look for evidence for your new perspective and celebrate that evidence. Third, you surround yourself with people and information that supports your new perspective. Fourth, you take actions based on your new perspective even when they feel uncomfortable. Over time, these actions, these practices, they create new neural pathways. Your brain builds new associations. What started as a conscious choice becomes automatic. That's when you know your perspective has really shifted. As I'm wrapping up this entire conversation with you, I want to bring you back to the fundamental truth that I opened with. Your perspective is your power, not your circumstances, not your background, not your education, not your connections, your perspective. People often ask me, Lily, how do I change my life? And my answer is always the same. You start by changing your perspective, because everything flows from that. Your perspective determines your actions create your results become your reality. This is why I'm so passionate about this work, because shifting your perspective is free. It's available to you right now. No matter where you are, no matter what you have, no matter what's happened to you, you can shift your perspective. And when you do, your entire life shifts. The most successful people I've ever studied, the people who've overcome impossible odds, the people who've built incredible lives, they all have one thing in common. They understand the power of perspective. They use it intentionally. They protect it. They nurture it. And now you understand that too. You have that knowledge. The question is, what are you going to do with it? What perspective are you going to choose? What reality are you going to create? All right, so I want to give you some specific action steps for this week, because again, knowledge without action is just information. First action step, identify one limiting perspective that you've been holding. Get really honest about what belief about yourself or the world has been holding you back. Write it down, name it, acknowledge it. Second action step, create a new perspective to replace it. Don't try to be unrealistic. Just find one that's slightly more empowering and still believable to you. Write that down too. Third action step, look for evidence for your new perspective throughout the week. Every time you see evidence that your new perspective is true, notice it, write it down, celebrate it. Fourth action step, take one action this week from your new perspective. Do something that someone with your new perspective would do. Do it even if it feels uncomfortable. Fifth action step, share what you're learning with someone you trust. Sometimes explaining it to someone else helps you solidify it. Do these 5 things this week, and I promise you'll start to feel the shift. Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with something to remember. This is the most important thing I could possibly tell you. Your past does not determine your future. Your current circumstances do not determine your possibilities. Your previous experiences do not limit your potential. What determines your future is your perspective right now. The way you choose to see things right now. The story you choose to tell about yourself right now. The belief you choose to hold about what's possible right now. This is incredibly powerful because it means you have agency. It means you're not a victim of your circumstances. It means you can change your life by changing your perspective. You can start that right now. You don't have to wait for circumstances to change first. I hope this episode has given you a lot to think about. I hope it's highlighted areas where shifting your perspective could create real change in your life. I hope you're feeling inspired and maybe a little bit empowered. This is just the beginning of this journey. There's so much more to explore about how your mind works, how your beliefs shape your reality, and how you can intentionally create the life you want. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss future episodes. Make sure you check out our podcast playlist where we have tons of content designed to transform your perspective and your life. I release powerful content every single week, and I want you to be part of this journey. Feel free to reach out and let me know what perspective shift you're working on. I love hearing from you. I love knowing that this content is actually making a difference in your life. And remember, you have everything you need right now. You have the power to change your perspective. You have the power to create a different future. You have the power to become who you're meant to be. Believe in yourself the way I believe in you. Okay, one final thing before we go. If this episode resonated with you, I want you to do me a favor. First, like this podcast. Your engagement helps me reach more people. Second, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Third, share this episode with someone you know who needs to hear this message. And fourth, check out our podcast playlist because we have so much more transformational content waiting for you. But most importantly, take what you've learned here and actually apply it. Shift your perspective, take action, create the life you want. That's what this is all about. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. Thank you for opening your mind to new possibilities. Thank you for being committed to your own growth and transformation. You're going to do incredible things. I can feel it. Until next time, remember that your perspective is your power. Choose wisely, live boldly, and keep growing. This is Lily, and I'll see you in the next episode.